Snow fell like whispers that never reached the ground. The wind sighed through the trees, rushing over the peaks like a secret too heavy to say out loud. Nestled high in the mountains, far from the cities, from chaos, from masks and headlines, stood an old wooden cabin. It creaked under the weight of winter, hidden from every eye but one. Batgirl stood at the window, wrapped in a thick blanket that had once belonged to someone else. Her hair was damp, clinging to her neck. A bruise stretched like ink across her collarbone, barely healed. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just watched the storm roll over the valley, eyes sharp, unmoving. This place was meant to be forgotten. A safe house built for no one. She had stumbled onto it half alive, blood frozen to her gloves, comms dead, heart fractured from a fight that had gone too far. Gotham was behind her. Burned bridges, shattered alliances. The mission had failed. She had failed. But up here, no one asked questions. No one expected her to save the world. Not anymore. Then the earth moved. It was small at first, a rumble that seemed like wind beneath the snow. But the trees began to shake. Birds scattered like ash into the gray sky. Then came the sound, not thunder. Something deeper, like the world cracking open from the inside. She dropped the mug in her hand. It shattered against the wood floor. Outside, in the white blur of snowfall, something massive moved between the trees. She didn't breathe. The figure was huge, taller than any man she had ever seen. Muscles like stone. Skin, green and glowing even beneath the clouds. Steam rose from his shoulders. His eyes, distant and filled with pain, scanned the forest like a wounded animal searching for a place to die. Batgirl stepped back from the window, heart pounding in her ears. Her fingers twitched toward her belt. But what good would gadgets do against that? It was him. The one people called a monster, a walking earthquake. The Hulk. He didn't see the cabin. Not yet. He trudged through the snow, slow but heavy, like every step cost him something. She could hear his breathing even from inside. Raw, uneven, as if rage and sorrow had been stitched into his lungs. She ducked behind the wall. What was he doing here? Why now? She held her breath, body tense. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But she couldn't. Not yet. She didn't know what he wanted, or who he was when the anger faded. He paused. For one long, frozen second, he looked straight at the cabin, straight through the wall, as if he already knew. Then he turned and vanished into the snow. Batgirl waited, crouched in the shadows, heart still racing. The storm howled louder now, and the forest seemed to lean closer. She whispered into the cold air, almost to herself. He's not supposed to be real. And yet, he was. And something told her this mountain was no longer hers alone. 3 days passed, but the tremble in the earth never left. The snow had stopped falling, but the quiet was heavier now. Thicker. It wasn't the peace of solitude anymore. It was the silence that comes when something bigger is watching. Batgirl hadn't left the cabin. Not far, at least. She watched the tree line like it was a loaded weapon. Every creak in the wood, every crack of ice outside made her hand inch toward her belt. Her body remembered combat, but her mind whispered hesitation, because this wasn't a criminal or a soldier. This was something else, something broken, something vast. She had seen him, really seen him, through the cracks in the window. And it wasn't just the size or the strength that made her heart race. It was the way his shoulders dropped, like he didn't want to fight anymore. The snow held his tracks like a memory, deep, wide prints that cut straight through the trees, never circling, never hiding. He wasn't stalking. He was searching for what she didn't know. On the 4th night, she finally stepped outside. Moonlight spilled over the mountains like silver dust. The cold bit through her boots. She followed the trail for just 10 minutes, not daring to go farther. Not yet. Then she found it. A clearing. The trees had been torn from the earth, but not in rage. They had been moved, stacked like shelter. crude, clumsy, but careful. At the center, steam rose from a shallow crater in the snow, where a fire had been built. Now only embers whispered in the cold. And beside it, a carving in the trunk of a fallen tree. A handprint, larger than any she'd seen, pressed deep into the bark, like he'd needed to feel something solid, like he was trying to prove he existed. Batgirl touched the edge of the print. He was still nearby. She turned and hurried back, vanishing into the trees like a shadow. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the fire in the cabin, staring at the doorway, listening, waiting. Just after midnight, she heard it. Not a roar, not a crash, just breathing. Heavy, controlled. Outside, the doorknob never turned, but she knew he was there. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. And yet something passed between them, a quiet agreement written in breath and stillness. She whispered one word into the dark. Why? No answer came, just the sound of boots crunching snow, slowly fading into the trees again. By morning, she found something outside the door, a single branch of pine, tied with a torn strip of red cloth, the same shade as her cape. Not a threat, not a warning, a message. Batgirl stood there for a long time, the cold forgotten. In all her years of fighting monsters, she had never received a gift. She brought it inside and laid it on the windowsill, beside her grappling hook and broken communicator. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly. Somewhere in it, the Hulk moved like a ghost, not chasing her, but not leaving either. And something inside her began to shift. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't looked her in the eyes. But somehow, he had seen her. Batgirl woke to the scent of pine smoke and something deeper, a raw, earthy smell that clung to the air like a memory. It was the scent of him. For the first time in days, she didn't move when she opened her eyes. She didn't reach for the mask, didn't check the window, just lay still, listening. Outside, the wind howled through the trees like a distant cry. The storm had come back with a vengeance, but the night was oddly quiet. It was as if the world had taken a deep breath, holding it for what was to come. She pulled herself out of bed, the muscles in her back protesting with every movement. Her shoulder ached, the injury from Gotham still a constant reminder of the life she had left behind. The pine branch was still on the windowsill, a small, simple thing. But something about it felt intimate. Her fingers brushed against the soft red cloth, tracing the edge. She'd worn that shade of red many times. Once it had meant something else, something she had lost. But now it felt different, like a thread that connected her to something she hadn't expected. The door creaked softly as she stepped outside. The mountain was cloaked in heavy snow, a blanket of white that softened every edge, every sound. But the tracks were there. Always there. The Hulk had been near again. This time, she followed them. The snow swallowed her footsteps as she moved, every step pulling her farther into the heart of the forest, into his world. She had known there were dangers here, monsters that only existed in legends, but she had never expected him to be one of them. Not in the way that he was, not in the way that her heart began to recognize him as something other than the beast the world had painted him to be. The tracks led her to a place she hadn't seen before, a small clearing where a rough shelter had been built, half covered in snow. It looked like a cave, but crafted from the branches of trees, crude and hurried. A fire burned low at the center, its warmth flickering against the cold. She stopped at the edge, hidden in the shadows. Her fingers curled instinctively around the hilt of a throwing knife, but she didn't draw it. She watched instead. There he was, sitting on a stone, his back to her, head bowed. His massive frame hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable. But nothing about him could ever be small. Not in size, not in strength. Certainly not in the weight of the pain that clung to him like a second skin. He wasn't sleeping. His hands rested on his knees, large and scarred. He looked lost in thought, distant, as if he was trying to remember who he had been before the world turned him into the thing he was now. For a long time, she said nothing. She simply watched him, knowing he could feel her presence but unsure whether he would acknowledge it. The wind howled through the trees again, but this time, he didn't flinch. He didn't react. He just sat there, lost in the quiet. Then, without turning, he spoke. "You've been following me." The words were rough, like rocks scraping together, but there was no anger in them, only acknowledgement. Batgirl didn't step forward. She didn't answer right away. She didn't know what to say to him. She didn't even know why she had followed him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something deeper, something unspoken that had pulled her out of the safety of the cabin, deeper into the mountains, closer to him. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but clear. "You're not what they say you are." He didn't respond. But in the way his shoulders tightened, in the way the firelight flickered in his eyes, she knew she had struck something inside him. Something that he didn't want her to see. And for the first time, she felt a shift. Not in the snow, not in the trees, but inside her. The night was colder than it had ever been. The wind screamed across the mountain as if warning them, as if nature itself was trying to push them apart. Batgirl stood near the edge of the clearing, watching the Hulk. The fire crackled weakly between them, flickering in the heavy snow. She could feel the heat of it, the space between them, stretching wider with every breath. Neither of them moved. Neither spoke. The silence was unbearable. It hummed like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. It was him who moved first, slowly standing from his seat, his massive frame towering against the dark sky. The muscles in his arms flexed, and Batgirl's eyes followed every movement, her heartbeat quickening despite herself. The night felt alive with energy, heavy with everything that had gone unsaid. He turned to her, his eyes bright and wild, like a man struggling against the storm inside him. And yet, there was something else there too. Something fragile, hidden behind the layers of anger and grief. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, his voice gravelly, but somehow softer than she had expected. She didn't flinch, didn't back away. Instead, she took a step forward. She had been running from things her whole life, always hiding in shadows and fighting in silence. But this felt different. He felt different. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. He looked at her then, his brow furrowing, as if trying to understand her words. He shook his head slowly, like he was denying something, battling something that even he couldn't name. "I'm a monster," he said, his voice bitter. "You should be." Batgirl swallowed hard, the truth of his words cutting deeper than she had expected. But she didn't back down. She didn't let the fear settle in her gut. "No, you're not." Her words were sharp, almost defiant. He took a step toward her, and she didn't move. The tension between them crackled, thick and heavy. The night grew still, the snow falling in soft flakes around them. Then, in a moment that felt like it was both slow and fast, he reached for her. His hand hovered in the air for a moment, trembling like he was afraid to touch her. But then, as if pulled by something stronger than his fear, his fingers brushed her cheek. The contact was gentle, almost tentative, as though he was testing the waters, unsure whether he had the right to be close to her. But Batgirl didn't pull away. And then, as if the entire world had held its breath for this one moment, she closed the distance between them. She stepped forward, her body moving on its own, and kissed him. It wasn't like anything she had ever experienced. It was electric, chaotic, wild, like lightning striking the earth. The fire between them exploded, filling the clearing with heat, and for a brief moment, the world felt like it stopped spinning. But then the ground trembled beneath them, a force stronger than their kiss, more violent than any connection they could ever share. The earth cracked open, the mountains groaning in protest. She broke the kiss first, stepping back in shock. The Hulk's eyes were wide, and for the briefest second, she saw the fear in them, The same fear that she had felt so many times in her own heart. The fear of being too much. The fear of not being enough. What was that? She breathed, her voice shaking, not just from the kiss, but from the power she had felt in his touch. The ground trembled again, and this time, she knew what it meant. They weren't alone anymore. The world had heard them. The ground didn't just tremble, it shook. A deep, rumbling roar filled the air, so loud it seemed to split the very sky above. The snow around them fluttered like 1,000 feathers in a storm. The fire between them sputtered and died, casting the clearing into darkness. Batgirl's heart slammed against her ribs, her breath coming in quick, sharp gasps. He was already moving. The Hulk's massive frame lurched toward the trees, his eyes wild, scanning the horizon. His whole body seemed to pulse with some primal instinct, every muscle taut, ready to react. But it wasn't just his fear that vibrated in the air. They were here. Batgirl barely had time to brace herself before the sound of helicopters sliced through the sky. Low, relentless, the whirring blades cut through the night like a death sentence. Run. The Hulk's voice was low and strained, his words full of something deeper than warning, something like pleading. Batgirl didn't hesitate. Her instincts kicked in, and she sprinted toward the trees. But she knew she couldn't outrun this. She couldn't hide from it. The first explosion rocked the ground beneath her feet, sending a shockwave through the snow. The earth cracked open, and the trees around them splintered like toothpicks. The Hulk roared, his primal scream vibrating through the air. He wasn't just fighting them. He was fighting himself. Batgirl hit the ground, scrambling to her feet. The world was chaos now. Fire, smoke, and falling debris clouding everything. She barely caught a glimpse of the Hulk's form, crashing through the forest like a tidal wave of destruction, tearing apart anything in his path. The helicopters circled above, a swarm of metal and light, calling in reinforcements. They were coming for him, and they were coming for her too. She knew this fight wasn't hers to win, but she couldn't leave him. Not now. Not after everything. She grabbed her gear, a blur of motion, and headed straight for the chaos, ignoring the voices in her head that told her to run, to stay safe. There was no safety. The next explosion came from behind her, throwing her off her feet. She crashed into the snow, her body slamming into a tree trunk, the air knocked from her lungs. Dazed, she gasped for air, her vision swimming. Through the haze, she saw him, the Hulk, his body covered in bruises, his green skin streaked with dirt and blood. But his eyes, they were still filled with fury, the kind of fury that could level entire cities. He didn't stop. He couldn't. The pain of being hunted, of being forced into this chaos, consumed him. Batgirl pushed herself up, her legs shaky, and ran towards him. She couldn't hear anything now, only the pounding of her own heart. She had to get to him before it was too late. Another explosion ripped through the air, and she threw herself to the side just in time to avoid being caught in the blast. She scrambled to her feet again, her fingers closing around her communicator. The voice on the other end was frantic. "Batgirl, you need to get out of there. Now." But she didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she found him. The Hulk was standing at the edge of the clearing, his back turned to her. The ground beneath him still quaked, his breath coming in ragged, uneven bursts. He had reached his breaking point. She could see it in the way his fists clenched, the way his muscles trembled with restraint. "Stay with me," Batgirl called out, her voice cutting through the smoke and chaos. She wasn't sure if he heard her. But when he turned, when his eyes locked onto hers, she knew. He was torn between the monster they feared and the man who had just kissed her, like he was trying to hold onto something that might slip away. And then, as if the world had finally decided to push them both over the edge, the sky split open with the sound of missiles raining down. The Hulk roared. Batgirl ran toward him. But the world had already broken open. The sky cracked open, and the first missile slammed into the ground with a deafening explosion. The shockwave sent Batgirl flying, her body slamming into the snow with brutal force. She gasped, struggling to draw in air as the world around her exploded into chaos. Smoke, fire, and dust filled the air, blinding her, deafening her. The Hulk was ahead of her, a force of nature, smashing through the chaos with raw, unrelenting fury. Every step he took sent tremors through the earth. Every punch he threw sent debris flying into the air like broken glass. But he wasn't just fighting the military anymore. He was fighting himself, fighting the rage that threatened to consume him whole. Batgirl pushed herself to her knees, her head spinning. The snow around her was stained with blood, her own and the others. Her chest ached from the fall. But she couldn't stop now. She had to reach him. She wasn't afraid anymore. She couldn't be. Not when he needed her. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaking beneath her, and ran toward him. The helicopters circled above, a swarm of mechanical vultures, their guns trained on the Hulk, firing relentlessly. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered but getting to him. "Bruce," Batgirl shouted, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. She couldn't hear herself over the explosions, but she knew he heard her. He always heard her. His eyes locked onto hers for a split second. There was something broken in them, something she recognized. He was drowning in a storm of emotions, torn between what he was forced to be and what he could never escape. But she could see him, really see him, the man beneath the rage, the man who had tried to protect her. She reached him just as another missile tore through the air, aiming straight for the Hulk. She didn't think. She acted. With a swift motion, Batgirl launched herself forward, pushing the Hulk to the ground, just as the explosion rocked the earth beneath them. The blast knocked her breath out of her, but they were safe for now. The Hulk's massive body shielded her, his arm instinctively wrapping around her like a protective barrier. Batgirl gasped, her heart racing, as they both lay there in the snow, the world a blur of smoke and fire. She could feel his heart pounding against her, his breath hot on her skin. For a moment, everything went still. The chaos outside faded into the background, and there was only the raw, frantic beat of their hearts. "Why do you keep saving me?" Batgirl whispered, her voice hoarse. The Hulk's grip on her tightened, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable in his eyes, something that didn't belong to the monster everyone feared. "I don't know," he murmured, his voice trained, barely above a whisper. "I can't stop. But before he could finish, another explosion rocked the ground, throwing them apart. Batgirl tumbled through the snow, her head spinning. She pushed herself to her knees, ignoring the pain in her chest, in her bones. The helicopters had regrouped. The soldiers were closing in. They couldn't stay here. Batgirl looked up at the Hulk, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, the responsibility of everything they had to lose. But she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. It was a fight for each other. She extended her hand to him, the snow falling like a blanket around them. His gaze softened, and without hesitation, he took it. The world wasn't ready for what they were about to unleash. With one last, defiant look at the helicopters above, Batgirl whispered, "Together." The Hulk's lips twisted into something that wasn't a smile but something more, a promise. Together. And they ran. The wind howled like a dying animal as Batgirl and the Hulk tore through the snow, moving fast but with purpose. The helicopters loomed above, relentless, like predators closing in on their prey. The night was a battlefield, the air thick with smoke and the distant rumble of explosions. Every step they took pushed them closer to a confrontation that neither of them was fully prepared for. But Batgirl knew this. There was no turning back now. Not after everything they had fought for. She glanced up at the Hulk, his eyes burning with an intensity that matched the fires around them. His fists were clenched at his sides, and every movement he made sent tremors through the ground. He was fighting more than just the army above them. He was fighting the thing inside him, the monster he feared. But Batgirl wasn't afraid. They had reached the edge of the mountain, the cliff dropping away into nothingness. Below, the valley was swallowed by shadows. There was nowhere left to go. The helicopters circled above them, waiting for the moment to strike. "We can't outrun them," Batgirl said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We have to fight." The Hulk's eyes flickered with uncertainty, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "I don't know if I can control it." Batgirl stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "You don't have to control it. You just have to trust me." For a moment, he didn't answer. His gaze shifted, searching the smoke-filled sky, as if looking for some way out. But there was no escape. There was only them, standing at the edge of everything. A deafening roar from the helicopters broke the silence. The first missile launched. Batgirl's heart raced. "Now," she whispered. With a guttural cry, the Hulk leaped into the air, his massive form soaring toward the nearest helicopter. Batgirl followed, flipping gracefully through the air, landing with precision on a nearby rock. Her eyes were fixed on the battle unfolding in the sky. The Hulk crashed into the helicopter with a force that shattered the metal, sending pieces flying in every direction. The explosion lit up the night, a brief flash of orange and red against the dark sky. But they weren't finished. The second helicopter swung in, its guns trained on the Hulk. Batgirl's instincts kicked in. She launched herself from the rock, throwing a series of high-powered explosive batarangs at the helicopter. The impact caused a massive explosion, but the helicopter remained intact. The enemy wasn't backing down. "We need to finish this," Batgirl shouted, her voice drowned out by the roar of the helicopters and the pounding of their fists. The Hulk snarled, his fists slamming into the ground, as if the very earth was his enemy. The ground cracked beneath him, a deep rift forming in the mountain as he let loose his full strength. The air seemed to bend around him, vibrating with the sheer force of his rage. But Batgirl was right behind him. She leaped, aiming for the final helicopter, her mind focused on one thing. End this. She used the rocks around her to propel herself upward, landing on the belly of the aircraft. Her grappling hook shot out, and in an instant, she was attached to the chopper, pulling herself toward the cockpit. She could feel the tremors of the Hulk's blows below her, his rage churning the air like a storm. The helicopter bucked under her weight, and Batgirl threw a flash grenade through the window. It exploded with a blinding light, and the helicopter spiraled out of control, crashing into the mountainside. The battle was over. The remaining silence was almost as deafening as the war they had just fought. Batgirl landed on the ground next to the Hulk, both of them breathing heavily, covered in sweat and debris. The smoke still hung in the air, but the chaos was gone. The enemy was defeated. But as she looked at him, she saw the war still raging behind his eyes. They had won, but the fight for their hearts was far from over. The mountain was quiet now, too quiet. The once violent winds had calmed, leaving only the soft rustle of snow as the aftermath of the battle settled over the world like a blanket. Batgirl stood on the edge of the cliff, staring down at the wreckage below. Her breath misted in the cold air, the exhaustion from the fight still clinging to her bones. She could feel the weight of it all, the violence, the destruction, and the immense power they had unleashed together. But she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Not yet. She turned her gaze to the Hulk, who stood a few paces away, his broad back to her. The glow of the distant fire reflected off his green skin, casting long shadows that danced in the stillness. His massive body was battered, bruised, but it was the quiet that unsettled her. His breathing was steady, but there was a storm behind his eyes, a storm he hadn't let anyone see before, not even her. "Bruce," she called softly, her voice breaking through the silence. "It's over." He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her at first, but Batgirl could feel the tension radiating from him. She had seen him in the heat of battle, the fury in his movements, the raw power he had. But now, standing on the precipice, with everything they had just fought for in ruins, it was as though a part of him had cracked open, and she didn't know how to reach it. "You're still the same," she continued, taking a few tentative steps toward him. "I thought that maybe." After all this, we find a way to change it, to change you. He let out a heavy sigh, the sound filled with something too deep for her to fully understand. You don't get it, do you? His voice was low, like a rumble of thunder on the horizon. I'm not who you think I am. I'm not the hero. I'm the monster. I always will be. Batgirl stopped a few feet behind him, her heart aching at the weight in his words. She had seen the rage in him, the chaos that threatened to consume him. But she had also seen the man beneath the anger, the man who fought for what was right, who tried to protect those he loved. You're more than that, she whispered, stepping closer, until she was right beside him. I see you. I know you, Bruce. Not the Hulk. Not the monster. The man who kissed me like he was trying to hold on to something. He flinched, the rawness of her words cutting deeper than he would ever admit. Slowly, he turned to face her. His eyes were dark, but there was something in them that softened at her touch. Her hand reached out, gently brushing against his arm, feeling the tremor that ran through him. I'm scared, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that one day I'll lose control. And when I do, I'll hurt you. Batgirl's heart cracked wide open. She stepped closer, cupping his face in her hands. You won't. Not while I'm here. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them standing at the edge of the mountain. The past, the fight, the fear, it all seemed distant, irrelevant. In this moment, there was only the quiet between them, the raw, aching bond that had formed in the heat of battle and in the silent moments afterward. But the world had a way of pushing through, demanding its pound of flesh. A sudden crackling sound broke the silence. Batgirl's head snapped up, and she felt the shift in the air, the pressure of something heavy moving toward them. The world wasn't done with them yet. Far in the distance, the faint sound of military vehicles could be heard approaching. They weren't finished. Not by a long shot. The fight wasn't over. But in this brief, fragile moment, Batgirl took a step back from the edge. Her fingers intertwined with Bruce's, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, they would face it together. I'm not letting go, she promised, her voice steady, unwavering. Bruce looked down at their hands, then up into her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled, not with joy, but with something softer, something more real. Neither am I.